See, hi
Hey
there,
gang, how's
Joe.
everybody doing? Nice to see you all from across the pond.
Yeah. How are you today?
I'm doing good, Peter. It's great to be here and chat with you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And
Really?
you've been busy with stuck at home with Olympus videos and doing some fun stuff.
Yeah, I'm one of those people. I always keep myself busy. So when our lockdown started here, I knew that I couldn't schedule shoots since I'm usually doing portraits and working with models. So I thought, all right, time to come up with something. So that's where the Stuck at Home challenge came from.
All right. Now somebody is saying that there's no sound. That same thing happened last, and
Uh-oh.
then it all of a sudden just we got sound. It's
Now it
interesting
says we
that
got
it
sound.
takes a
There you
little
go.
while. It takes a
Hmm.
little while. So I need to ask you again that you've been working with stuck with Olympus, or stuck not stuck with Olympus, but stuck at home
Yep.
videos and a lot of interesting stuff. And what I really like those is that you can see that you're having fun yourself and trying to make others also have fun. And I think that's really great stuff.
Well,
And
thank you. I mean, that's really a big part of it. Obviously, I'm a people shooter by trade. I photograph people and models and that kind of stuff. So I kind of went into it with the attitude of one, here's an opportunity to use skills that I don't normally use, and two, to really kind of break every, I hate to say rule's a bad word, but to break every guideline or method that I would normally use for my photography and just try things that are way outside the box because I know from experience that crazy things that I might wind up doing while I'm photographing a loofah sponge or a bottle, I'll still take away ideas and little techniques that I can use later when this is all over, when I'm in the studio with a model or doing a portrait. So it's not wasted time. It's really a way to keep my skills sharp, but also to keep pushing myself.
of course, yeah, that's and it's always. I noticed in some of the videos, you just kind of like we're shooting something, and then you all realize, hey, this is interesting, and started doing something else that you
Yep.
might have started with and or thought, and that's really something really really interesting. But
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I definitely encourage people anytime you're photographing something. One of the luxuries we have with digital technology is that each frame doesn't cost us money like it did in the film days. So I'm
exactly,
a big believer in the idea that when I pick up my camera and I have an idea, I assume that it's not the best idea. It's just an idea. It's my starting point. So I'm going to shoot whatever is in my mind, but then I'm going to keep kind of pushing. I call it work the shot, and I'm going to work it until I get to a point where I'm like, yes, that's I love it, and that's it. So
yeah, that's a really good approach. And as I said, I really like the attitude of having fun because when we come back
sure.
to about you switching to Olympus, will but first I really like to ask you that how did you become a photographer? What was the thing that you wanted to? When did you?
uh,
Why did
so
you pick up a camera?
so there's two levels to the answer. The first answer, why did I pick up a camera? Honestly, it was because I was mad at my parents. I was 11 years old. I had a deal with my parents where for Christmas and birthdays, instead of getting a lot of random toys, I could pick out like one kind of big thing. And one year it was a record player and things like that. So this was Christmas. I was 10 and a half years old, and the Sears and Roebuck catalog came to our house, and I was flipping through it, and I had always been fascinated with my parents' movie camera. They had an 8 millimeter
Oh,
movie camera, but
okay.
they wouldn't let me touch it. I wasn't allowed near it. So I saw these cameras, and there was a German camera. It was a Hanimex Praktika Nova 1B that was $75. And my limit was 100 US dollars. So I ran to my mother. It's like, this is it. This is what I want. And immediately she said no. I'm like, wait, you can't do that. It's $25 less than the limit. Why can't I have it? Well, she was smart enough to realize that that camera would lead to a lot more expensive things, even back then. So I went to my dad. I thought, oh, he'll give in. Dad wouldn't give in, but Dad was the smart one. He said, well, you know what? You've been saving to get a little mini bike, so you've got money in the bank. If you want it bad enough, go buy it yourself. So I know that he didn't think I would do it, but just to spite them, I went to the bank because back then, even at 11 years old, if you had your passbook, you could walk into the bank and take money out or put money in. So I went to the bank and I took my money out and I bought a camera. And then what I learned about a year and a half later, because I was a really shy kid, I would avoid talking to people. I was very shy. About a year and a half later, I was in middle school And my math teacher was the advisor for our school yearbook. And he talked me into taking some pictures for the yearbook, and he told me, shoot whatever you want. So I took all kinds of interesting pictures of like book covers and hallways and just random things. But then he gave me an assignment, and the assignment was to go and photograph a club after school. And these were all ninth graders. I was in 7th grade. These were kids that were older than me. They never talked to me. I didn't know any of them. I was scared to death. And I showed up after school, and I walked into the room, and the room got completely silent. Everybody turned and looked at me, and then big smiles on their faces. It's like, what do you want us to do? The photographer's here. And everybody was all excited. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. Like, people will talk to me. Like, they're interested in me. And so the camera became kind of my ticket to be able to talk. It was my access to people. And that's still my thing today. I've done a little bit of everything in my career, but it's always involved photographing people. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because my background is also in portraiture and photographing people. When I used to have a studio, I don't have one now. I used to do a lot of portraits and model portfolios and stuff like that.
Yep.
But then fast forward, a couple of years ago, you switched from Nikon to Olympus, and I've seen that video a couple of times, and I just watched it in the afternoon here. And one thing that struck me is that you wanted to have the fun back. What did you actually mean?
Well,
what was the fun in Olympus?
I've never been kind of the gearhead type photographer. I love my toys, but I'm a very visual shooter. So I had used Nikon my whole life. I just accepted this is what I use. I was very happy with it. I was comfortable with it. And it was right about the time that Nikon was announcing the release of the D850. I was using the Nikon D810. I was happy with it, but I looked at the price tag of the D850. I hadn't had the D810 for that long, and I'm kind of thinking, my God, how do I justify the cost? Because I was one of those people that kind of very much like a zombie, you know, I would just new camera comes up, I'd upgrade, kind of like we were doing with the phones. And that's when it really kind of clicked in. Like, I was taking more pictures with my phone than I was with my Nikons. I only picked the Nikons up if somebody was paying me. Like, if it was a job, I picked up my Nikons. Otherwise, if I was photographing my dogs or my grandkids, or even when I went on vacation with my wife, I used my iPhone. I was like, this is like ridiculous. I've got these really, really expensive cameras and lenses that take, you know, incredibly high quality images, and I don't use them. So I had just started my adventure here on YouTube and was using Panasonic for my video. Very happy with it. And one day, honestly, I was bored. And I thought to myself, you know, everybody keeps saying this Micro Four Thirds stuff. It's not that good. It's only good for video. So I took the Panasonic out to a park and just took a bunch of random pictures for an afternoon and came home, downloaded them. And I was really blown away by the results. I was like, I don't get what the big fuss is. Like, and this was a GH4 at the time. I was very impressed with the results. I'm like, well, what's the big deal? And this camera, which, you know, even that Panasonic GH4 is larger than most of the Olympus cameras at the time, especially, but it was still a ton smaller and less expensive than what my Nikons were. So I just started casually doing some research. And, you know, the general vibe that I would read about online was, oh, Micro Four Thirds, if you're going to do video, you go with Panasonic. If you want it for stills, you look at Olympus. And then, of course, there was still all the Micro Four Thirds sucks. It's this, it's that. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to rent one. I'm going to try it out. So I went to lensrentals.com and rented an EM1 Mark II. The 12-100 zoom is what I rented as a package. Tried it out for a couple of days, and it was awesome. And even then, I mean, truth be told, it was about a year to a year and a half worth of still doing more testing, going back and forth. I'd used Nikon for so long, the idea of changing was scary. But the great part is I made the change. And now, I mean, there's never an Olympus camera that's more than about 3 feet from my hand somewhere, whether it's like, you know, a little TG6 stuck in my pocket or, you know, lately, honestly, I've been having a ton of fun with the EM5 Mark III and the new 12-45. Like, it's so small and so tiny, but yet it's a full feature professional camera as far as I'm concerned. I know Olympus doesn't call it a professional camera, but they should. I mean, it's a full featured camera, so there's nothing that I can't do with that camera. So
yeah, my favorite go-to camera when if I go out and have a walk and just photograph myself is the EM5 Mark III and the 12 to 45 millimeter 4 lens. It's a I think it's a marvelous camera for that.
Yep.
But now you're using are you using the newest EM1 Mark III?
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. The Mark III is obviously it's awesome. And for me, I loved the EM1X. I loved it more for its technology and the promise of what it was bringing, not only to Micro Four Thirds and to Olympus, but to photography in general. I mean, that camera is groundbreaking with some of the technology. But for me, what I love about the EM1 Mark III, it's the same form factor that brought me to Olympus to begin with, because my first Olympus camera was the EM1 Mark II. So it was the same form. It's the same form factor, but obviously it's got a lot of the incredible advancements. So, I mean, to me, yeah, it's an incredible camera. So I still have my EM1X. You know, if I don't shoot a lot of sports, maybe a couple times a year, that'll be the camera I'll take out for sports work and that. But the EM1 Mark III is hands down.
Yeah, the EM1X is better if you have big lenses. Then it's a bit better than. But otherwise, I use both. I don't either like the X that much. Actually, I don't even have one right now, so I'm using the Mark II and Mark III. And what is your favorite feature, or do you have any favorite features in those cameras that you kind of like feel that can make you better images, that it's actually adding up to your images?
If I had to pick just one,
or two or three. You can choose.
Well, I mean, I think for me, the things that excited me a lot. So when they announced the features for the EM1 Mark III, especially, the fact that we were able to do the USB-C charging, which doesn't get talked about enough, is incredible. Wireless tethering is also a big bonus. You've got the improvements in autofocus. You've got the improvements in live composite, which, to be fair, you know, the ability to go 6 hours in live composite compared to 3 hours in live composite, that's not something I will do that often. But, you know, I think if I had to pick one feature that expanded my photography, it would definitely be live composite. It's kind of, I find it somewhat humorous because live composite clearly was designed by the engineers for like astrophotographers and that type of stuff. And I came along as this portrait guy, and I was kind of irritated that I couldn't find a way, like, you know, this is really cool, but why can't I use it? And so it took me a while after I got my Olympus cameras before I finally came up with the idea of painting the backgrounds. And then I realized, heck, I could do light painting and do product photography within that kind of stuff. So ironically, at least here in the US, whenever Olympus is looking for somebody to demo live composites, like they call me, I was like, I've become the live composite guy, but yet I'm a portrait shooter.
Yeah,
I still haven't done night sky beyond one time when it was actually an Olympus event that we were at. We had all the visionaries together out in Arizona, and we did the night sky out in the desert.
Oh yeah.
But other than that, you know, I just think that's, for me, that was a feature that it really is a game changer in terms of the way you approach all of those genres. I mean, we're talking about astrophotography, and we talk about any kind of long exposure photography. It's just completely a game changer. The cameras in general, all brands right now, they've advanced so far that, you know, you follow along on the internet, and anytime somebody announces a new camera, and if it doesn't have some revolutionary new feature, people are like, oh, that's crap. But the reality of it is these cameras have advanced so far. I don't know how many more revolutionary features we're going to see, at least not that close together. To me, live composite is a feature that really kind of went under the radar for a long time, because it is revolutionary in the sense that any kind of long exposure photography, it just gives you so much more control that you simply cannot replicate and do as easily with any camera that's relying on bulb or time exposure. You just can't. So.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And I've done also some product photography and big machines too, because you don't need the heavy, big lights. You can just, you know, light paint it and then made a few fixes in Photoshop. It makes it so much faster and easier, and it's mind blowing. technology. That's one of my favorites too, and I've done quite a bit. But you do some light painting with your portrait photography and your models too.
Yeah, I mean, I do the light painting where I've created the backgrounds in real time. I'll do special effects where I'm adding color rim lights and things like that. Even using the light painting to create depth. Everybody kind of takes, the first step into it, you think, well, I'll paint a background. Yeah. Well, with a portrait, it's always nice to have depth. So, you can create light patterns and designs in that where you're actually putting your subject in the middle of it by painting in front of and behind your subject. Yeah. So honestly, the possibilities are really kind of limitless. We're only limited by what we can think of.
Exactly. And that's what I love about digital, because it, in a way, it has kind of given us back the creativity, and it's with all these features, and that's what I really like about it.
Absolutely. With digital technology that we have today, if we can think of it, we can create it.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
That is true. Then I want to talk about one of your latest videos about catchlight.
Sure.
In eyes, you're a portrait photographer, and I found that video really fascinating, because you were talking about the science behind the idea of having only one catchlight, or maybe two. It depends, of course, a bit of the surroundings. But what is that's not, you don't like rules, and neither do I actually like. But there are some ways that you like to do. But why do you prefer one catchlight in the eye?
So it is about the science. So full disclosure, just to give a little bit of background, for much of my life and much of my career, if somebody talked to me about catchlights, I was kind of like, go away, I don't want to hear it. I'm going to do whatever I want and whatever I like. And as I go back and look at older images, I realized that while sometimes I might have two catchlights, sometimes I would have vertical ones, square ones, round ones. One consistency with my catchlights is that the catchlight wasn't the first thing you saw in the image. In other words, it was there, but it wasn't distracting. Now, that being said, kind of fast forward through life, I am married to a woman who is a cognitive psychologist. Fortunately, she's not a clinical psychologist. I'd be in a straitjacket for sure by now. But she studies the brain and how we learn and how we process information and things like that. So when we first met, I would tell her about something I'm doing in a picture, and being kind of the typical PhD scientist, she would turn around and say, well, it was this or it was that. And I'd be like, no, it's creativity, it's photography. So fortunately, she persisted and eventually made me realize that so many of these things that we do, there is actually a lot of science behind not only why we do it, but why it works. And then I started to kind of clue in on the idea that, hey, there's an opportunity with this science. The more that I can understand this perceptual science, the more control I have. And what I mean by that is, as photographers, as any kind of artist, you do your creativity, and then once you give it to the world, you basically have to let go and realize that no other person is going to have the same experience with that piece of art as you do, which can be kind of frustrating. And I'm sure you've all experienced the idea when somebody shows you a picture, or you look at somebody's picture, especially if they're there with you, and they feel the need to explain what you're looking at in the picture. And of course, you're polite and you listen, but you're not seeing what they're explaining because you weren't there. You didn't take the picture, right? So we're having a different experience. Yeah. So as an artist then, my thought process was, armed with this science, well, I could use this science to influence the way people will interact. One of the areas that every photographer is taught some of the science, even though it's not taught as the science, it's taught as a composition rule. We learn that diagonal lines are a great way to direct your viewer to your subject, right? So that is kind of really basic version of it, but that's a piece of cognitive science. So with the catchlights, for the most part, I follow the guidelines of what do our brains expect to see. So between 5 and 7 months old, we learn as infants that light comes from above. That's why when you walk into a room, the lights are built into the ceiling, not the floor. That's why in Hollywood, when they're making horror movies or they're showing zombies, they light them from below. That puts the shadows in the wrong places, and it makes the image very startling. You can Google a phrase called the uncanny valley, and you'll learn a lot about that facial perception with regards to light. Part of the reason we're learning that light comes from above is because of the sun. The sun, while it is a huge and massive light source, it is so far away, it appears very small in the sky, and it generally makes a pinpoint catch light, one catch light, and it's always going to be in the upper half of the eye. So by following those guidelines, we're basically creating catch lights that are what our brains would expect to see, which means that those catch lights will not be a distraction in the finished image. Now, over the years, I'm a firm believer that some photographers or photography groups have taken that whole idea too far. One of the rules that you frequently hear is that your catch lights should be at 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock. No, I don't subscribe to that at all. But that is a rule, especially if you're in the competitions. You better be prepared to put your catch lights at 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock.
That's true.
You know, that kind of stuff. Also, there's a lot of science behind pupil size. We know from scientists that a dilated pupil indicates interest, potentially attraction. But the flip side of that science is that a contracted pupil, a really small pupil, especially with someone like with blue eyes, is going to show a lot more color in the eye. So that's actually, for me, one of the areas where I oftentimes will go against the science and go ahead and use a smaller pupil to get more color. At the end of the day, I think that it's important information for photographers to understand because it becomes a tool in your toolkit. But I think that it's something that ultimately, yes, we should be paying attention to it, because if we're going to create great work, we've got to pay attention to every little detail in the image. But I also feel that if we apply it as a rule in our minds, then we're also killing the creative potential. Because I could think of an almost endless number of ideas, maybe like I do stuff obviously with lots of makeup and props. So maybe I'm doing something that's got like a very sci-fi, almost alien vibe to it. Well, then it would actually be very effective to have two strong vertical catch lights in the eye, almost like cat eye type thing, because it would fit the character and fit the mood of the shot. So that's why I'm kind of anti-rules, because I think we always have to be open to those possibilities, but understanding, you know, how things will be perceived and interpreted gives you a lot more control.
Yeah, that's really, really good points there about the how actually science thinks and how do we see, because it's the same thing with images, that we usually see the lighter part in the image first in general, which is one really great thing. And about the, you probably know the photographer Martin Schöller, who has it's actually his style that he has two strip lights, and some of the images are not, to my eye, really great. But then on some people, like Jack Nicholson portrait, for example, is stunning because it actually fits him, the eye, because the idea of course, I see him in different movies with a different character, and that's why. But then there's some other female actors that I don't think that suits them that well, but those are strong images anyways. But he uses that, and he probably uses really huge ones because those catch lights are all the way from up the eye, and those are really great. And then I came across one of your videos where you were talking about that portrait is 80% psychology and 20% technology or cameras. But on that particular video, I think you talked more about the cameras, about the 20%, if I remember correctly. But what about the psychology side? Because usually people, when they start or ask questions about portrait photography, they always ask about lenses, cameras, and stuff, and which is actually not that important, because in my opinion, usually when you shooting, like you say, shoot people, is that you need to click with the people. It's not about clicking the shutter, but without clicking, or it's about clicking with the model. And you probably agree on that.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think that, you know, the thing that, especially for a beginner, what they need to understand about portraiture, and the way I'm going to describe this, it sounds maybe a little bit overwhelming. That's not my goal, is to make it overwhelming. But I think the more that you understand this as your roadmap for learning, the sooner you can not frustrate yourself. And that is the fact that when you're photographing someone for a portrait, in other words, you're interacting with them, they know that you're aiming a camera at them. They've either asked you to do it or you've asked them if you can do it. You are in a situation where you have got to be spending more time and effort interacting with that person, having a relationship with that person, than you do being a photographer, meeting the technical stuff. So obviously it goes without saying, that's why we need to learn how to use our cameras. We need to read our camera manuals. We need to understand the inverse square law. We need to understand depth of field. We need to understand the exposure triangle. That's the foundation. That's what allows you to then pick up this tool and have this relationship. So that's the first piece. From there, it's a matter of understanding a couple of things that most people are a little bit nervous when they get in front of a camera. Rightfully so. Why do I say rightfully so? Because basically when someone steps in front of your camera and agrees to let you photograph them, whether they've asked you or whether you've asked them, they have put themselves and agreed to put themselves in a rather vulnerable position. And I don't mean vulnerable like bodily harm, but I mean vulnerable in the sense that you're going to aim this camera at them and you now have the power to make them look really good or really bad. So right out of the box, that means that you're in a situation where this person is not completely comfortable, not completely relaxed, and that's not the way you want to photograph anyone. You want them to be relaxed. You want them to be comfortable. So the challenge is that you have to be able to create an environment where you're taking pictures, but it doesn't feel like the camera is between you and your subject. A lot of photographers will kind of hide behind the camera, not necessarily intentionally, but just because they're so much into gear and trying to figure things out. Yeah. You know, you've got to be doing everything that you can to put that person at ease, to get that person to relax. Even something, I mean, two things that portrait photographers say all the time that are the two worst things, and this goes back to psychology. This is not the cognitive psychology. This is more of clinical psychology in terms of how we deal emotionally with things. Two words that photographers say that they should never say. The first one, pose. So simple rule that I have for photography in general, pose is a 4-letter word. Remember what your mama taught you and don't use 4-letter words. Yeah. It's kind of like auto, you know, all that kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So we avoid pose. And the reason why we avoid pose is that even just the mention of the word denotes don't move, sit still. And it's obviously, if you're shooting a portrait, you don't want your person dancing around, but at the same time, you don't want them sitting there stiff like they're afraid to move. Yep. And photographers that are listening, next time you have an opportunity after this lockdown to put a person in front of your camera to do a portrait, if they're sitting down, make sure you're paying really close attention to your subject the very first time you pick up your camera. The very first time. And I guarantee you, if you pay attention, 90% of the people that you photograph a portrait of, the moment you pick up the camera for the first time to put it up to your eye, that person is going to go like this and sit up. Yep. I defy you to try that yourselves right now while you're watching this live stream and just sit up for 30 seconds. At the end of 30 seconds, you're going to start to get tired. Yep. You're going to start to realize that there is tension building in your collarbones and it's rising up through your neck. None of these are things that we want to see in the body language of a portrait subject, right? Yep. So even just using that word, it's a bad word. Another word that's a really bad word that photographers use all the time is they will say to a subject, smile. We learn when we're children that smile means cheese. So the fact of the matter is, and again, this goes back to the cognitive science now. So the regular kind of clinical science is that if you say smile to somebody, they're always going to give you an extreme reaction. They're not going to give you a natural reaction. Going back to the cognitive stuff, there's a lot of research. You can Google the phrase Duquesne smile. Our brains have a expression that we recognize as natural and relaxed when it comes to smiling, and it's named the Duquesne smile. Oh. That is a smile that we visually connect with. It's a smile that we find to be attractive and beautiful. But the challenge of it is, it's not a smile that somebody can do on demand. They can't practice it. They can't make it look perfect. It comes from emotion. It's driven by natural emotion. Yep. So even for me, when I'm working with models or working with portrait subjects, I won't say smile. If I want the person to smile, I'm going to talk about the idea that, hey, this is going to be a happy shot. And while I'm talking about that, I'm getting really happy. And it's like, I want a lot of energy and we're going to do happy. And understand that as a photographer, and you could try this with your spouse at home while we're locked down. People will tend to mirror your body language. We also do it. Photographers do it. They'll mirror the body language. So if there's something that you're looking for from your subject, you need to be giving that back to them. By giving that back to them, you're helping generate that response that you want without them specifically being told, do this or do that. And of course, the worst four-letter word you can use is not just mentioning the word pose, but using pose as a directive and saying to somebody, okay, go ahead, give me a pose. Because the minute you do that, you've just challenged your subject.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that was really, really interesting. And there's actually one thing that every photographer should do. They should model also. Ask a friend to take your photograph. Yes. Then you can realize that if the guy is or the girl is behind the camera all the time, you don't know what's going on. It's really awkward. And I bet you won't get any good pictures. And that's a good practice. Then you'll kind of realize that you need some...
Absolutely.
You need some interaction too.
Yep.
And how do you make most of your portraits are commercial? So or do you approach people that you want to take their picture? If you see someone somewhere and you know that you have a photo gig, do you?
So it's interesting. Throughout most of my career, when I was working with models and that, it was a matter of, they would come to me or a client would hire me and models needed to be hired. Over the last couple of years, while I've been working on my YouTube channel and have really kind of migrated to teaching as much, I've actually, for the first time in my career, gotten to the point where I will see someone who I think this person would be really interesting to photograph, and I will ask them. Ironically, I started making this change in my habits about the same time as the world started experiencing Me Too and, a whole new awareness about proper behavior. So it was kind of like, wow, maybe I should just go back to the old way. Or I thought, no, it's again, it is about showing respect. So certainly to just approach somebody and say, hey, I'd like to photograph you. There's a right way and a wrong way to go about that. But one of the reasons why I've really enjoyed going in that direction, and I explain this to young, and I use young and new interchangeably, but to new photographers, what they will tend to do is try to do what everybody else is doing. YouTube is the worst at that, says the guy on YouTube, right?
Yes.
People see something in a YouTube video, it's like, oh, I want to do that.
Yep.
And that's fine. I think that's a great idea to do it, so that you can master that technique. But if you don't then take that new technique that you've learned and figure out how to make it yours, then really all you're doing is being a zombie who's copying somebody else and ultimately probably copying it poorly.
Yep.
So the challenge is, to be creating your own stuff. So one of the things that I make it a habit of, and I know it's this way in Europe, the same it is here in the United States, since the digital age has come along in the internet, there is this whole other community of models and modeling that is really more on the amateur side. It's for art, it's for fun. I know in Europe, one of the big sites is Purple Port. Here in the US, we have a site called Model Mayhem. Yeah. And even today, just on Instagram, it's very easy to go on and find young women who are modeling and want to be models, but to be clear, they're not modeling professionally. They're not signed with agencies. They're not appearing in advertisements. They're modeling for photographers of all skill levels who appreciate photographing them. So one of the things that I make a habit of, I don't contact those people. I don't photograph those people because those people are being photographed by hundreds, if not thousands of other photographers.
Yeah.
So that means my images of them are competing with tons of other people.
Yeah.
I didn't become a photographer because I wanted to compete. Why compete? So I avoid the competition as much as possible. I would rather photograph somebody who I find interesting and attractive, and I'm not worried about their skill as a model. I'll teach them what I need them to know. But that way I know that when I'm done photographing them, they're also not going to turn around and go and try and get in front of 300 other cameras. So my images are going to be somewhat unique right out of the box because I'm working with a face who is also unique because they have not appeared in tons and tons and tons of other photographs.
Yeah, that's a really good way, and that's one important thing that you said, that people are copying each other, and that is I can understand when you're learning and learn kind of like starting out as a photographer, then you need to copy and learn things and look at images and try to replicate them. But remember that then you need to do your own stuff after that. Start kind of like building up from that and doing something different, because we, especially in model photography, we have like millions of exactly same kind of images, and that's kind of, there's not much new that has happened lately. But this has been an interesting conversation. But now I will pop up a few questions that I got beforehand. And we already a bit talked about it, but what's your favorite effect you have shot with live composite? This comes from Roshhard3131.
Oh, favorite effect?
Yeah. Or favorite thing and effect that you have shot with live composite?
Well, I think just because it's something that I don't normally do. Last December, Olympus here in the U.S. was kind enough to give all of us visionaries the EM1 Mark III. So we got it pretty early, and they took us for a meeting out to Arizona, and we went out in the middle of the desert at night, where there's no air pollution at all. So the sky is completely clear. And it was the first time in my life that I did star trails, and it was also the first time that I got to use the new Starry AF autofocus for, shooting star trails. That was just amazing. I mean, it was really cool to do it. In terms of what I would normally do with live composite, it's really, I have a phrase. People will frequently ask me, like, what's the coolest assignment you ever did, or who's the coolest subject you ever photographed, or what's the coolest picture, like what's your favorite picture? And my answer is always the same. And it's actually my sign off that I use on YouTube. Your best shot, it's your next shot. And for me, I get bored with my work really quickly, because while I'm proud of my photography, it's not about the finished photograph for me. It's about, just like I mentioned in 7th grade, it's about that experience. It's having access to the people. So I'm always excited for the next thing I'm going to do. With live composite, I think probably the two things I've had the most fun with is light painting backgrounds, which I started out using an LED wand, and now more recently I've been using just small, tiny tactical flashlights with color mods on them from a company called Light Painting Brushes. I have a lot of fun doing those because I still haven't gotten to a point where I think I've exhausted all the potential with that. And then probably one of the more fun shoots, there was a local photographer here in my area who's a wedding photographer who was thinking about switching over to Olympus. I've known this photographer for years, and they reached out and they were asking about the live composite. And we were just kind of bouncing ideas back and forth. And I said, you could do a really cool live composite shot with the bride and groom. You could paint a heart behind them. And he was like all excited about this. He's like, but he didn't have Olympus gear yet, and he hadn't tried it. He's like, well, so, would you come and help me out? I was like, all right, you know what? It sounds like it'll be fun. So we picked the time. I showed up like at the end of the reception for that wedding. I didn't do the wedding, but we set this up, and we painted this huge heart behind the bride and groom. We had the reception hall all lit up in the background. And it was fun because it's something that I wouldn't normally do. But really with live composite, I think the most fun thing is what I haven't thought of yet, because I really am convinced that I've only scratched the iceberg in terms of what could be done.
That's true. But what I really like is that, isn't it totally fun that you've been photographing, 45, 50 years?
Yeah.
And you still get excited about new things, and I think
Oh, yeah. Well,
that is amazing, because not all that have been doing that long does that, and I think
right.
that's really great to hear, because
Yeah,
that's
I'm a little hardcore on that philosophy, meaning, I'm kind of the idea that, hey, like if you're a photographer and you don't enjoy what you're doing, then maybe it's time to find a new career, because I don't understand how you could not enjoy it, right?
yeah, exactly.
And I've gone through a lot of different phases throughout my career. I started as a newspaper photographer. I ran a portrait and wedding studio, very successful portrait and wedding studio. I did everything from like little sports teams, to you name it. And then I migrated into fashion work, and I did commercial work and advertising and product photography. I did food photography for a bunch of years. So I still tell people, honestly, I still have no idea what I'm going to do when I grow up, but I know that it will have a camera. Photography is the thread. But admittedly, for me, that's part of why I can still have fun with it.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't been doing the exact same kind of photography for my entire life. It is really all about what excites me now. Fortunately, I've always been kind of entrepreneurial mind. So in addition to what excites me, it's how can I make money at it, because I have to pay my bills. But yeah, I mean, if it's not fun for me, if I'm not learning, I'm not having fun, it's time to quit.
Yep, exactly. That's a good attitude. And then there was another question from Matt Broom, and this is the one that actually I warned you about. That are you going to stick to Olympus no matter what?
Okay. Well, so there's two ways to look at that. It's safe to say that Olympus is stuck with me no matter what, because if you guys have never seen it before, yes, it's a real tattoo that I have. When Olympus here in the U.S. sent me the contract to become a visionary, I was excited. I mean, I never thought that something like that would be part of my career. And at the very top of the contract, it said brand ambassador, but I was excited. And I thought it said brandy ambassador. So I ran out, and no, I'm kidding. But yeah, I mean, at this stage of the game, I went, 42 years with Nikon. I've mentioned in this conversation, I'm not a gearhead. I mean, I love gear. Who doesn't, right?
Yeah.
All boys love their toys, right? But it's never been about, hey, this is the newest, latest, greatest, coolest. It's about what gets the job done for me. And at this point, no, there would be no reason for me to switch. I mean, one, let's be fair, I don't have that many years left. So, there's really no reason. But I spent a year and a half literally considering the Olympus change. It wasn't like, oh, here's a shiny new object, let's go change. And Olympus didn't pay me to change. I bought my Olympus cameras. This was something I did on my own. I did have the good fortune of being able to have some direct conversations with Gavin Hoey, who we all know.
Yeah.
And he did put me in touch with the Olympus marketing people, and I did have some conversations with them directly about the gear right before I purchased my gear. But there was no, hey, will you be an ambassador for us, incentive. This was an organic change that I made. And every reason for me changing, everything that I wanted out of the gear, Olympus has met or far exceeded those expectations, especially with the new gear that's coming out.
Yeah.
And admittedly, even now that I've been using the cameras for a while and have had the opportunity to learn even more about the technology behind them, I mean, just one of the things that surprised me honestly the most, I understood from when I tried the cameras, which I tried them several times before I bought. The lenses were great. I was really impressed with the sharpness and the clarity. But I didn't at that point understand anything about telecentric lens design and the benefits of it and how it worked. And the more that I came to understand that, and then I had the opportunity to use even more of the Olympus lenses. So I will admit I made a couple mistakes. I shouldn't say mistakes, but when I purchased my system, I literally, in a 2-week period, I traded all my Nikon gear away and I bought my Olympus system. And there were 2 lenses that I left out, which I wound up picking up later. But it took, people on the internet basically saying, what are you thinking? You have to get these 2 lenses, the 12 to the 100, the f4, I had no interest, no desire in that lens when I was doing my research. And in part, the biggest reason was because of my old school thought process with full frame and everything else. Like, it's an f4 lens. And I just couldn't get past that in my head. And the other lens that I had no interest in it because I thought it would be too long for my portrait work was the 75 1.8. So those were the two lenses I didn't buy when I switched. I did buy them later, and ironically, the 75 1.8, it's still second on my list to the 45 1.2. That's my go-to lens in the studio. But the 75 gets used probably about 25% of the time in the studio. But that 12 to 100, that's been my go-to carry-around lens for easily 2 years now.
Okay.
Now,
okay, yeah.
it may be upended by this 12 to 45. So, it may have to share some time now with the 12 to 45.
I see.
But yeah, I mean, I see no reason why I would leave. And I'm not the kind, somebody could come out with something really cool tomorrow. Because I've had plenty of people ask me, like, hey, now that Nikon's, got their cameras out, do you regret it? It's like, no. Number one, I don't hold any ill will towards Nikon. I don't want to see Nikon or any company go out of business because that's not good for the industry,
of course not.
period.
Yeah.
And I am thrilled. In fact, I know a couple of the Nikon ambassadors, personally, and I know that they sincerely love the mirrorless gear. They're having a ton of fun with it. A big part of cameras, which never gets talked about, it's ergonomics. It's how does that camera feel in your hand? One of the reasons why I never became a Canon user was because I didn't like the ergonomics of the cameras. So I stuck with Nikon. Even when Canon was doing so much better than Nikon, I stuck with Nikon. When I started thinking about Micro Four Thirds, I was worried, like, is it too small? Is it not going to feel right in my hands? And the ergonomics in Olympus cameras, as far as I'm concerned, they're unsurpassed in the industry. But that's for me, for my hands, for the way that I work. It's not going to be the way for everybody.
Yeah, that's an important thing. It's always if you are buying something, and I think you've said many times that rent it and test it before you buy anything new. If you want just the look and feel is really important because if the camera feels good, you will get better images. That's for sure.
Sure.
And you already mentioned the 45 and the 75 millimeter lenses.
Yep.
And those are your portrait lenses that you use the most.
Yes.
Yeah. And you still because I used to have the 75 was my favorite, but for me too the 45 millimeter 1.2 lenses is because the 75 had one thing that you are a bit further away from the model. I like to be with the 45. You're a bit closer, and that's why that's the only reason. Otherwise, 75 would be.
That's why I give the 45 the edge, is because I like being able to be closer and being able to interact easier with my subject.
Yep.
So that's exactly the reason why I prefer it. Yes.
Yeah, and then there was.
And it's worth noting, which I'm sure you know this, Peter. I've only had a chance to try it out. I don't own one, but I have had a chance to try it. People think that because, like, they'll say, well, Joe, you use the 45 1.2, I can't afford that lens. The 45 millimeter 1.8, the premium lens that Olympus has, is every bit as amazing in terms of sharpness.
It is.
Obviously, it's the same focal length. So the difference is, it's not a 1.2. So if you're all about the bokeh, you don't get that feathered bokeh that Olympus created, which is cool. And it's not weather sealed. Beyond that, it's every bit as good a lens. So that's also one of the cool things about the Olympus gear. They've got this Pro series of lenses that they're building out, and they're wonderful, but they've also got this incredible lineup of lenses that are ridiculously affordable when you start comparing.
Especially the 45 millimeter, I think is one of the best quality ratio, price ratio lens. It's marvelous. It's really marvelous. And then there was a third question that was sent before, and that was that's actually for both of us. That it was what will / should the next generation of Micro Four Thirds cameras in general be like? What could be improved? What do you like and find inadequate in the current generation? So is there anything that you would the next camera to have something different than the current model?
Wow. I think for me, it's not so much about needs to be improved or it's a problem, but it's about a set of features that are coming. And so let's be clear now that I said that. No, I don't have any inside information. You'll understand when I explain this why I'm kind of anticipating this. I mentioned earlier in the conversation about how the EM1X was somewhat of a technological marvel.
Yes.
Obviously, it was bigger for a couple of reasons. One of the biggest reasons is the camera has 2 processors in it. And when you have 2 processors, you generate a lot of heat. You have to be able to dissipate that heat. That is the #1 reason that camera is much larger than other Olympus cameras. Now we get a little bit further down the road, a year, and we've got the EM1 Mark III that has basically come out with another new processor, just one, but that new processor is able to handle many of the new features added into the EM1X. What we haven't been able to get in the smaller camera yet, but if we look backwards at technology, we can look forward and know that we will be able to get it. That's the artificial intelligence.
Yes.
Once we get to the point that we are able to roll out all of the capabilities, and when I say all the capabilities, if you imagine for a minute, Olympus hasn't even hit all of the potential of artificial intelligence yet, but they were the first to come to market with it. I just think that we're going to reach a point where the cameras are going to be able to pick up so much of the slack for us. Like a lot of photographers, my generation, a lot of photographers like, oh, these cameras do so much work, you're not a photographer anymore. I say that's bullcrap. Like, just that's totally crap, because for me, and it goes back to what you asked me about, Peter, the 80-20 concept.
Yes.
I don't care if I'm a landscape photographer. I want to be paying attention to my subject. What's in my scene? What's happening? What am I doing? I don't want to have to keep thinking about every little detail of the camera. So I'm very excited about the potential that, the idea of this artificial intelligence has. I want to see us take this artificial intelligence concept, which, let's face it, artificial intelligence is just, the computer's thinking for us. I want to add that into the software. I want to see us get to the point where instead of shooting 1 frame at a time, our cameras actually shoot a 4-second video clip no matter what we're doing. So follow me, guys. Maybe it won't be like this exactly, but you'll get the idea. So let's say I'm shooting a portrait. I press the button, it shoots 4 seconds. So now 4 seconds at today's standards will go 30 frames per second. So that's 120 frames I just fired off. But every photographer is going to say, look, I don't want to have to edit through that many frames. I completely agree. But yet we already have software that exists in cameras by different brands that can determine if your subject is smiling before it presses the button. It can determine if your subject has their eyes open before it presses the button. It can take an image of 10 people and it can find the best expressions. So why can't we then have a piece of software like Bridge or Lightroom that when you download all of your images, you basically go through a series of checkboxes really quick. I'm photographing a person. It's a portrait. I want the person looking at the camera. I want both their eyes open. I want them smiling. You check off all those boxes, and it's going to go through those 120 frames in seconds, and it's going to bring you back the 3 best frames.
Yep.
And then you're actually doing less editing than you are now, right?
Exactly.
So I think, and I know I digress from cameras to software there, but I think the more of this kind of technology, like the artificial intelligence, really letting the computers do a lot of kind of the grunt work that we have to do as photographers. I can't wait to see more. I hope I get to see more of that in my lifetime. I really do. I think it's exciting.
That is. I also like the idea of artificial intelligence, especially in the M1X. The subject recognition is great thing.
Yep.
It's not
Incredible.
Just the first phase, so it's not really something really special, but it will be when they figure it out. And then there's one question in the chat. There was from Sam Thompson, and he was asking that what have you not achieved in photography that you would want to? Is there anything that you would want to achieve?
Wow.
That's a big question. I know.
Yeah. I think, at this stage of the game, if you asked me that question when I was 20 years old, my answer at the time would have been very clear and it would have been immediate. And that was I wanted to win a Pulitzer Prize by the time I was 25. Keep in mind, I was a newspaper photographer.
Of course, yeah.
The reality of it is you don't really get to decide, okay, I'm going to go and shoot my Pulitzer today,
That's true.
And life takes you in different directions, and certainly my career took me in different directions. I think at this point, the thing that I most want to achieve is honestly an extension of what I'm doing. It's one, to be able to keep having fun. I consider myself insanely lucky to be doing exactly what I'm doing right now and to be educating people and working with people and sharing what I've learned over the years. I figured out pretty early on when I was young, because back then, sure, I would have loved to have said, okay, in 10 years, I want to have the title of the greatest photographer in the world. And I learned pretty graphically at that point, that was never going to happen. I'm not the greatest photographer. Not even by a million miles am I ever going to be in that category. But I am a guy who's been able to spend his whole life doing it. So I love the fact that I get to share what I've learned. I get to help people. And especially now, what's really fun for me is I get to shoot what I want when I want. So my client is what I'm teaching. So I guess really I hope I can keep doing it. That's really what I want to accomplish, is I want to be able to keep doing it until I simply can't do it anymore.
Yeah. For me, actually, it was when I was younger, I said that someday I want to shoot the Pirelli calendar, but I'm not going to do it. That was just kind of a dream. But actually,
sure.
the funny thing is that you said that having fun, and that's also for me, the fun thing is to enjoy and learn new things about photography, because that is something that I want to do. As I said, or like Joe said, I'm not either ever going to be the greatest photographer in the world, and I don't mind that. And I also feel very lucky that I can actually do what I really love. And sometimes I feel a bit guilty because I don't feel that I'm working when I'm making images for the clients, and that's kind of like feeling that. And I think that if it's an interesting answer from you. And let's see if there are any questions. We have been here almost an hour, and I think Joe has some other program today, so we'll be here for a few minutes for some questions. Let's see if there aren't any questions really. Let's see what we have here. Not really. People are having conversation of their own, which is really great. I always love that when people helping you. Somebody asks something and people are answering to each other, and
so here, guys, I'm gonna be gutsy, since unless you're in a hurry, Peter. There's a question that I know you're kind of avoiding, but I'm gonna take it on.
All right, go ahead.
Are you game? Okay. So Starstare 97. I've been scrolling back because I see a lot of people getting irritated with this user. So I thought, you know what? Let's address this, and let's be really clear, gang. I'm not going to be a jerk to this guy. So any of you that are listening, especially if you're my followers, please don't be a jerk in return. But let's talk about this. I saw the first post here, at least I think it was his first post. Still looks to me as if Olympus has a long way of making their product line relevant for most photographers. It's mostly luxury for people who have worn out their full frame systems. We already know I wouldn't agree with that, but let me get his other posts in here. Next one he had is, a good photographer always be a good photographer. Gear doesn't define a good photographer. Just looking for a reason why most people would choose Ollie instead of Sony or Canon. So let's start there, because after that, that's where we got into big debates, right? So Starstare 97, you actually bring up a couple really good points, but I also think they're slightly misinformed, if I'm being fair. Again, keep in mind, this is coming from a guy that used Nikon for his whole career. And at least in my opinion, I didn't reach a point where, I kind of outlived my use with those models. It was more a matter of realizing that there is other technology and other options out there. I would argue, Starstare 97, that part of the reason why you feel that cameras like Sony or Canon, or, let's go ahead and put Nikon in that list, and let's go ahead and even put the full frame Panasonics in that list, right? We'll say full frame in general. I have a feeling that part of the reason why you are of that belief is, one, we could take the short approach and say, well, you probably are a full frame user. That doesn't matter. But a lot of people, I find, don't understand enough of the technical details, truly technical details, foundational details of photography, to realize that so much of the technology that is available and in a full frame camera is actually not necessary. Let me explain. Because yes, your statement, Starstare, a good photographer will be a good photographer, and you can take the best camera in the world and put it in the hands of a photographer that doesn't know what they're doing, and it's not going to be the best camera in the world, right? I agree. No debate there. But here's some science, and I will go back to the science, and actually it's that same cognitive science that I've been talking about. When we talk about how many megapixels are in a camera and the sensor size and all that, the fact of the matter is those cameras are generating image quality at a degree that our brains are not able to appreciate and understand. Now, does that mean that you shouldn't still want to have that quality? Does that mean, no, it's certainly an option. But the fact is, it's not needed. What I would encourage you to look at is a couple of things, since you admitted in one of your statements that you were kind of trying to start a debate, okay? I will say that I think it's ridiculous for us to debate. Now, Starster, I don't know from where in the world you are, but here in the United States, you know, the all-American car brands are Ford and Chevy, right? Don't dare tell a Ford user that a Chevy is better and vice versa, because that will devolve immediately into a really bad conversation. But what's the psychology behind that? Why does that happen? Well, in one, because cars are really expensive, just like cameras, right? They're really expensive. So the idea that one brand is better than another, or even for that matter, that one brand is better than another for certain things, that's actually ridiculous. Because sure, you know what? I could take amazing pictures with this phone. I'm not afraid to say that, even though I'm wearing an Olympus tattoo, because if I said otherwise, I'd simply be lying to people, right? So, you know, at the end of the day, when you talk about Micro Four Thirds not being relevant, now look, understand that Olympus, I'm going to talk about Olympus specifically since I'm an Olympus ambassador, right? Olympus, the company, is a medical equipment device company that also has an imaging division that makes cameras. Much like Canon, much like Sony, these are companies that do other things, and they make cameras, okay? Olympus has never been aggressive at going after the whole market. Never. That has not been part of their corporate culture. You've never seen Olympus try to do that or try to be that company. And they still don't do it. But yet, ironically, Starstare, here's some facts. Already this year, and of course, this year's upside down. So there will be people that will say, well, that's because this is such a weird year. Excuse me. But Olympus is already gaining market share. Specifically here in the United States, there's been reports released very recently about the market share that Olympus is gaining. And that's because what Olympus has done, which I think is very wise as a company from a marketing standpoint, is not gone out and said, hey, we're the best camera company in the world. Because that's completely subjective. There is no best camera company in the world. But what Olympus is doing is they're educating people about what you can do with a Micro Four Thirds system, and educating people about what does it really take to do the kinds of pictures that you want to do. So at the end of the day, sure, we could go like fully around in circles, and I appreciate that you are probably very, very passionate about your brand, but at least understand, Starstare, that those kind of debates and those kind of conversations, and I say this with respect, they're not helpful. They don't benefit anyone that's here in this room or watching this video. And most importantly, they don't benefit you. It's just like last year when all the rumors started about, whoa, Olympus is going to go out of business and this and that. And yet here we are. We're gaining market share. And we're one of the companies that is being successful during this crazy situation that's happening. The fact of the matter is, when people start these ridiculous debates and they trash one, I don't care what brand, all they're accomplishing is making photography more expensive for themselves and for others. All of this debate, I don't care what brand we attack, I don't care what brand we attack them for, we make it harder for them to sell cameras. So just like we don't make it a habit of arguing about cars or clothing or whatever it is, why do we do this with cameras? Why do we have so many arguments and fights? Because the only people that are suffering, it's us. Yeah. We're hurting ourselves.
That's true. That's true.
Just saying. So I sorry for that.
No, that was
little dispute,
that was brilliant.
But, you know,
that
I
was
completely
brilliant.
understand. I understand people being, you know, passionate and proud of their gear. And obviously, let's face it, we spend so much money. I would hope that you're passionate and proud of your gear,
exactly,
regardless of the brand. But those debates don't help anyone. They just don't help anyone.
Yeah. There was one question from Rick Bear. He was asking you that whether you use any of the IBIS settings, SIS modes 1 or 2, that switches off IBIS in horizontal or vertical panning.
So for me, I actually, this is on the US, the Get Olympus Instagram stories today. That was one of the questions that came up. I actually leave my IBIS on auto 99.9% of the time for two reasons. One, I actually don't have a need for the other settings that much, given that I'm primarily like portrait and fashion, and that's why I said 99.9% of the time. If I'm maybe photographing, you know, a sporting event, or maybe photographing even my grandson running around in the backyard, then I may switch it. But the other reason why I don't pay a lot of attention to that is I'm so darn old. I remember photography long before there was any kind of image stabilization or vibration reduction. So, you know, I learned how to do all the things to make sure that you were going to have your subject sharp when you didn't have the ability to have the camera help you. So honestly, and maybe it's part being lazy, I'll own that, but I tend to just go with IS Auto simply because I'm still going to do the right things. I'm going to pay attention to, am I holding the camera properly? I'm going to generally not use a shutter speed that's slower than the focal length of my lens unless I have an extreme reason. I'm not afraid to use a tripod or a monopod. And I kind of work with that philosophy, knowing that the camera has my back, right? That Auto IS is there, it's on, it has my back. So for my work, I don't have a need to switch that much.
Oh yeah, that was good. And your previous answer has gotten a lot of positive comments and thanks for that. Like
yeah, and I hope. I mean,
like
again,
Ron Pierce says, I'll highlight some of them because they're really
go for it.
Really good. Now let's see if there are any other. Yeah, there was one question earlier about flash. Do you how much do you use Olympus flash, or you mainly use studio flashes, which are not, of course, Olympus branded, but
right. So I primarily use Godox, in part because I had the Godox before I started using Olympus cameras. The Olympus speedlights are really nice. So remember, this is an Olympus ambassador. I'm going to say this. This is not popular amongst my brand, but the Olympus speedlights are nice speedlights. They're well made, they're durable, they're very high quality. However, I am a firm believer that camera companies in general, so this applies to all brands, they should stick with cameras. Lighting companies should stick with lighting, and so on. I'm a big believer in the stick with your core competency. I have never found a camera brand flash of any brand that is as full featured as, you know, what you would get either from like a Profoto or a Godox, and that is based on my needs as a portrait type studio photographer. So that's not going to be the case for everyone. But yeah, you can actually, if you watch some of the videos of me from some of the trade shows, like at Photo Plus and WPPI, you'll see me using the Olympus speedlights. Yeah. I mean, they work great. I have no problem with them. But in my studio, I can sometimes go from, you know, working with one light for weeks at a time, and then the next thing I'll be doing is like 7 or 8 lights all in one shot. Oh, yeah. Just sometimes just because I can, right? Yeah. And so especially when you start getting up to those, you know, multiples of lights, Godox is obviously, it's just a system that's much better set up to be able to deal with that. And you know, also, if we're being honest from a pricing standpoint, a lot of the off brands like a Godox are much less expensive feature for feature than what you're going to get from a camera brand flash of any brand. So
that's true. And also I actually have for studio flashes I use Godox, so I really never use speedlights, very rarely. I do have them, but I don't even remember when I've really used them. No, not in many years actually, but studio flashes are go dogs. It's because the price range is quite nice with if you look at the features.
Incredible.
There's not much difference. You know, I can get 4 of those in one price of a pro photo, so that's a no-brainer for me at least.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so let's see if we have all right, there's one question from Rick Bear. He wants you to be back on some time here.
I'll come back anytime. I have to get you on my talk chat too, Peter.
Yeah, I'll be happy to be there sometime. But
and Rob and I see you're in here too, so you're another one. You've got to come on talk chat with me. I'll reach out to you guys. We got to make that happen.
Yeah, that'll be totally cool. And but I think we've a little bit. I promised you that this will be an hour because you have some other video related stuff and your own live shows today.
Yeah,
so
I have a talk chat tonight.
I will thank you very, very much for being here and
thanks, Peter. I appreciate
for your answers and your videos and your nice tattoo on your hand and everything. That's so awesome. Actually, there is about tattoos. There's actually one guy who works at the biggest photo dealer here in Finland, in Helsinki. He has the OM1 tattooed on his hand.
Does he really?
Yeah, that's totally cool looking. He has some other tattoos, but it's in part of a bigger, like a sleeve, of what they call them, and you have this.
Wow. Okay.
That's really cool. But I will.
That's neat.
Thank you very much, and leave you and hope you have a good live show yourself today. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, and obviously stay safe and healthy through all this craziness.
Yep,
and
you too.
Hopefully we'll talk soon.
Yeah. All right. Great. And there, I will be having another Joe, but this time it's Joseph Ellis from Dallas, who is I think he's a wedding and portrait photographer, and he will be on my live stream next time. But